Howdy team, happy Thursday. Man, I've got some seriously gray hair. It's, golly, it's golden hour and it's a beautiful evening, so I'm out sitting in the driveway getting ready to hang out with some friends. I wanted to talk to y'all first and just noticed my hair, so sorry about that. Guys, we want to talk about John chapter 2 this week. Briefly the first half of the chapter, but significantly in the second half of the chapter, and I think there's a really cool dichotomy to see. So the students started reading John chapter 1 today from the Gospels Challenge, and Wednesday night I introduced the book to them, and specifically we laid down the challenge, hey, read the entire book of John before you start back to school. Now the Mansfield kids start Wednesday, but a couple of them were like, yeah, I could do that, and it's totally doable. John is a phenomenal book in a number of ways, but the fact that he writes very simply in particular is really, really helpful. But really the whole summary of the book is chapter 20, verse 31. John wrote this book so that people, all people, Jews and Gentiles, so that they would believe. And he frequently, because he was an insider with Jesus, he was one of the three that frequently got to be there when others weren't. He frequently writes of things that the others do not bring up. In fact, the first 4 chapters, almost all of that, none of the other gospel writers speak of the things that he does. So chapter 2, the first half of it is what's described as Jesus' first miracle, the wedding at Cana. That's where he turns the water into wine. And there's a lot that we could get into on that. And someday we will come back to that. But here's just simply what I would say, because I want you to show the students kind of the dichotomy of the two stories here. This is a story where a lot of people like to say, man, see, look, like Jesus loved to party. And Jesus did love to party. He loved to celebrate. Listen, there were a number of Jewish festivals that were all about celebration. So this is not new information. But people do love to point to this story and say, man, Jesus, he would have cracked a beer. Jesus was all about partying and just hanging out, just being chill. And that's not the point of that story at all. There's a part of that story that Jesus was very much respecting the wishes of his mother, who's the one who drug him into the situation. This is Jesus showing his authority over all things, including creation. This is one of the few miracles that John describes, by the way. John doesn't spend a lot of time talking about miracles. He's talking about the personhood of who Jesus was in his heart. So anyway, it really is all about Jesus, yes, showing that he did come to celebrate. But the second half of the chapter shows his seriousness. Now, here's what you need to catch. It's not always clear on this, but Jesus actually cleansed the temple twice. He did it early on in his ministry for his very first Passover, and he did it at the very end of his ministry just a few days before he died. John is the only one to record the cleansing of the temple early on in his ministry. And you'll notice there's a couple of similarities, and so it's not if you always thought it was the same story just told in different ways. I don't blame you for that, because there are some similarities, but a couple of differences you need to catch. John is the one that notes that Jesus used a whip, but it wasn't like he just found a whip. He actually put a whip together, which means that Jesus was very methodical about this. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a crime at all, but some would say a crime of passion, where you get enraged and you do crazy stuff. Jesus did this very methodically and carefully, including putting together the whip that he used to drive out the money collectors and the money changers. Here's the issue, and you need to understand this if you don't already, and students really need to understand this. So the law required that people would bring their sacrifices every year. Well, if you lived up in northern Israel, or you lived anywhere outside of Jerusalem, to bring a goat or a cow or a pair of doves with you, that made the trip a little bit more tricky. And so capitalism is not an American concept. Okay? That the idea of business has always been around. Very savvy business people said, hey, we can make this easier for you. Just come buy a unspotted lamb from us and you'll be good. Now, we're going to charge you out the nose for that, and that's exactly what they're doing. And even more so, if you weren't from Jerusalem, or even worse, if you were from outside of Israel, if you had to change your currency over, well, we're going to charge you for that too. So literally, that's why we call them money changers. They set this marketplace up. Number one, they were encouraging people to break the law, because the idea of the sacrifice is this cost you something, and not money. It cost you part of your livestock, your livelihood. So they were encouraging people to break the law. But on top of that, they set this marketplace up in what's known as the court of Gentiles. So this is the one space of the temple area where Gentiles were not only allowed, but Gentiles were encouraged to come and hear about the great God of the universe so that they could convert to Judaism. That's where they set the marketplace up, and obviously dissuading any Gentiles from coming in. You can see why Jesus was angry. He was good and angry, and he did something about it. What we want students to realize, number one from this, is that he has the authority to do this. You're hearing a lot of people who are using the analogy that Jesus turning over the tables in the temple is just like the rioters that we've seen across the country. No, it's not just like the rioters. Jesus was tearing up his own house, and he was driving people that didn't belong in his house out of his house. It's not the same thing as what's going on in the rioters. But Jesus had authority over this place. Number two, Jesus did take sin very, very, very seriously. And we've got to remember that. He is full of compassion and he's quick to forgive. But when we're unrepentant, that's a problem. And he will deal with that. And so we need to run to him for his grace and be very sober-minded towards the fact that we do have a God that can be wrathful at times, and rightfully so. And then finally, see what he said about the people at the end, because there were a number of people who were like, man, Jesus is awesome. We're just going to follow this guy. And it says that he didn't trust himself to these people. The idea there is Jesus knew the hearts of people. He knew their fickleness. He knew how easy it was for them to believe and not believe. And so he's setting some precedents early on in his ministry. He's saying some things that he was going to repeat later on. By the way, when he makes the statement, hey, I'm going to tear this temple down in 3 days, I'll raise it back up. Some of you will go, didn't he say that towards the end of Matthew? He did. In fact, it also says that the disciples, it says this in John and in Matthew, it says the disciples, when he rose again, they remembered that statement. It also says that the Pharisees, when they heard that statement, they got angry and they remembered that statement. Well, they remembered the first time that Jesus said it. Didn't make any sense to them. And they didn't know who this Jesus guy was that came running in and running them out of the building. But they were going to know, because he's God and because John is telling us his stories so that we would believe. So there's a lot to cover there, but I'm looking forward to doing it. Sorry this was long. I love you guys. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.